So one of the things I wanted to start out with is it's not really as much an issue anymore, but early on um, when this whole concept of test-driven development came about, TDD, there was a lot of contention on the internet because half the people out there were calling it test-driven development, and the other half were calling it test-driven design. And they were making big arguments based on that about what was a good idea. So when I say TDD, I'm talking about test-driven development, because I think test-driven design is a very bad idea. You shouldn't let your tests dictate how you design your product. You should let it dictate how you develop it, but not how you design it.
Well, I think some of that design also I think comes out that way because basically you have your requirements and you write the tests with test-driven development, you're writing tests first. So essentially you are designing based upon those tests potentially. Like, here's a requirement, write a test, and kind of some of the design comes out from that.
Well, okay, I see what you're saying. I think, though, that for me, design of the product, not design of the code, is what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
the test shouldn't dictate design of the product you're trying to create.
Yeah, but and when you say design, are you saying the ultimate design like the end user sees, or are you talking about the more like software architecture?
Well, mostly end user design and product design. What do we want our product to do? What do we want?
Yeah.
What features should it have? But also to a point, overall architecture, because if you let how you test dictate your architecture, that's, I think, also a bad thing. It can influence it, certainly. And when I'm putting things together, I'm constantly thinking about, how am I going to test this? Can I even test this? Or is there something else I can do that's easier to test, but still gives me the same end result? So I think about testing a lot as I'm doing both front-end design and architectural design for a system, but I don't let the test say, hey, you can't test this, so we have to do something completely different.
So with TDD, is there there used to be, maybe it's in the 90s or something like that, or even in the 2000s, there were software architects. If you're doing TDD, do you need software architects, do you think?
Well, I don't think that that's really...
And is that even a position anymore? Because I haven't really heard of anything like that.
I haven't heard of anything like that either for a long time. And I think that's because over certainly the past 10 years, more so than anything else, as we've moved away from desktop development more towards web development.
Or mobile development or
whatever. Right. It's gotten to the point where developers need a more full stack experience than being pigeonholed into these specific areas. Now, I mean, there are front-end developers who specialize in design and user experience and stuff, and there are back-end developers who specialize in coding and database management. But software architect and database architect, and I think those, I don't think that there are teams that are so big that they need that specialized of a person in them.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen that in a while. I mean, mostly you get a bunch of developers together. There may be a manager or someone, and then of course you have some more senior people, but basically they kind of go off in pods and tackle, like, it's kind of more the microservices model. If the project gets too big, they break it up and say, okay, you take this part of the application, you take this part of the application, which is kind of like a microservices approach.
Right. And, when I'm working on a team in the professional environment, like my current job, I've got many people working on things, but we do a lot of pair programming and cross-pollination of stuff so that all of us at least are aware of what's going on in all the other parts of the system. Because if my primary job, let's say, is database, I need to know how that fits in with the rest of the system. I can't code that in isolation. I can't develop that part. So,
yeah, and I was actually doing some Googling or web searching today in preparation for the show. And I actually, because of what you had in the notes, I was looking up test-driven development. And then I tried to search test-driven design, and it didn't come up. It was only essentially all, like, the first results were all about test-driven development.
Right. And I think that confusion has largely died out. The only reason I brought it up is because there is still a lot of contention about whether testing is worthwhile or not, which I want to talk about in a minute. Yeah, there is. Actually, I've got some firsthand experience.
Possible.
Well,
unless you have no tests and your boss is breathing down your neck, we've got to get this new feature out to, take the market, and that's the only reason that I would see it.
I never see tests as not being first-class parts of a system. I think testing is extraordinarily important. However, I have first-hand experience of senior web developers telling me that testing is just window dressing. Which, I mean, my jaw hit the floor when I had a senior developer tell me that.
Well, that sounds like that's certain UI components is how I would use that description. Oh, that's just window dressing.
Yeah, but this was a coder. This was a Ruby on Rails coder, senior developer.
This is to prevent your stuff from breaking.
Right. And, they had issues with upgrading they were still running old architecture because it took them, it was such a monumental task to upgrade and do all the manual testing that they had to do every time they went to try to upgrade something, that they are years behind on architecture and gems and Rails versions and Ruby versions, database. And it's I brought up, hey, we should probably get this up to more modern versions. And they were like, oh God, we can't do that because I said, yeah, well, because you got 9% test coverage and on this monolithic project, and I understand why you're hesitant to try to do it. But then, testing is just window dressing, which is why you're stuck in the past 10 years. I mean, sorry, but that's just the way of it.
Wow. If you like this clip and want to watch another one, you can click right here. Or if you want to watch the full video, you can click here.